can be discussed together. And then, yeah, maybe that's all my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ian, would you like to introduce yourself next to the panel?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ian Shimizu. I'm barely youth at this point. I'm 29 right now, but I'm very, very happy to share anything that I can about youth involvement in climate action today. My background is very much kind of in that zone. When I was a university student, I brought an organization called 350.org, which started these climate strikes all over the world prior to Greta. Back in 2016, 17, 18, over to Japan when I was a university student in 2015, before Paris. I'm sorry, actually 350 started the global climate strikes back in 2012, actually. So did a lot of kind of youth mobilization work during that time. After that, pivoted my time and energy towards awareness raising, feeling that that was very much necessary in Japan, where not many people, maybe even still, were aware of the issues of climate change. And today I'm the founder of an organization called WeMori, where we are trying to enable people to protect and restore forests all around the world. I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you for having me. Yeah, that's a bit about myself.
Thank you, Ian. Ms. Bridges, if you could provide a self-introduction.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Trista Bridges. I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting me. I actually run an organization called Read the Air, co-founder of that organization, and I live here in Tokyo. And that organization was basically started around a book that we wrote a few years ago called Leading Sustainably, The Path to Sustainable Business and How the SDGs Changed Everything. In my work, I work quite a bit around this topic of climate change that we're going to talk about today. We talked a little bit about the SDGs already in our introductions. And so that's been a critical in the business world. That's really been a critical, I guess you could say, framework is probably a bad idea, but I think way of kind of thinking about addressing development challenges and issues around the world. In many ways, this is a very big change for business because, as many probably know on this call, over the last 30 years, the focus of business has really been on maximizing shareholder value, right, and thinking about profitability. But now we're asking businesses to think much more broadly about what their role is in society. Some of the challenges that we have, they've created. Some of the challenges that exist, they need to be a part of fixing. So what we try to do is really help these organizations think about how they can do that. How can they change how they work, how they operate, what their business models are, how they engage with their customers, and also how they engage with other stakeholders. So whether it be government or NGOs or others, because civil society, for example, is a very important partner for business. So that's a little bit about me and what we're doing. And so looking very much forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Ms. Bridges. And Mr. Mappa, if we could have an introduction from you.
Hi. Hi to everyone. I am Ramon Mappa from the Philippines. I am currently the Executive Director of People's Initiative for Learning and Community Development. We are an NGO based here in the northern part of the Philippines, Baguio City in particular. And I have been with the NGO. I've been working with the NGO for almost 30 years, particularly in the field of community adult education and education for sustainable development, and then working in various themes from advocacy, local governance, environmental factor risk reduction, and working with diverse sectors, so from women, youth, indigenous peoples, fisher folks, farmers. So our organization has been working on climate change, particularly in environmental and climate change in the context of climate change adaptation and mitigation. So our major projects are right now is community-based disaster risk reduction. So our current project, big project right now is strengthening resilience by integrating risk management, social inclusion, and socioeconomic development. So it's a very multi-discipline, multi-themed project supported by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development and the ASB, Arbiter sa Marikina Bond, which is, they have a country office in Indonesia. So the project is as I said, it's a multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder project involving local communities, especially the most vulnerable sectors like women, persons with disabilities, in community-based climate adaptation action. So this is being implemented in 2 municipalities in the central part of the Philippines and 1 municipality here in the northern part of the Philippines. So from the NGO sector, taking climate action is very significant in our community development work, especially that we're aiming for sustainable development, because climate change is a development issue, and the problems we are facing now because of climate change are manifestations of a flawed development and economic model that we have, and its catastrophic impacts weigh very strongly for the poor and the most vulnerable. So as an NGO, NGO work is development focused and is strongly linked with poor and vulnerable communities. And NGOs are directly engaged with the community, and their development projects and activities, however small or big, has the potential to, it's very relevant in addressing their vulnerabilities from the impacts of climate change. And at the same time, NGOs has the potential to create that, what we call voice from the community to reach and influence local and national and even international processes in addressing climate change. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you to all the panelists for your excellent introductions. I think we will just move directly into our moderated discussion section then. We're a little ahead of time, but that's always a good thing in panel discussions because there's always so much to share. So maybe without too much further ado, I will just move directly into my first question. So allow me to share my screen. And this question is, let's start with, I'm particularly interested in Ms. Arun's input, as this question is looking directly at the role of governance and policymaking. So what is the role of government and policies that can enhance climate action at the local level? A lot of times we talk about climate action being a national obligation, but a lot of times all implementation has to occur at the local level. So can you give us some insights into this?
Okay, thank you for the interesting questions. So maybe, but the first question I can reply it with slides, yeah?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So, well, actually, there are plenty of slides, but we can just go directly to the slide that respond to the questions. So when we talk about the policy, it looks like a big, massive word, big word, the policy, but actually the process on making those policy is the bottom-up planning, yeah, and then also meet with the directive from the leaders. So with those combinations, we create a plan that accommodate the aspiration of the community. So maybe I can show some of the illustration on how those concepts are actually applied in Indonesia. Maybe I think several countries also have some kind of similar method. Like first, yeah. And also, yeah. So the first thing that we have to consider that there actually long-term development plan, national plan, and then also the global agenda, including the climate change agreement, Sendai framework, the SFDRR, and the sustainable development goals until 2030, and also other global commitments. And those, the global agenda plus with the long-term plan, it is combined with the vision of the appointed president, and then it creates the medium-term development plan. It is created for 5 years. Maybe in other case, it is different year accordance with the cabinet. And then from those big idea, we elaborate into the programs. And then we also narrow down into the strategic plan that being conducted with the line ministry. And then we also communicate with the locals, including the governance, the CSO, and also the academics. So we can see that the two keywords is the consistency from the up until down, and then also the synchronizations. So this is in a short, because the process is quite long. So in a short, this is like the summary on how we collaborate all of the ideas and all of the guidance and all of the mission that are stated in the global agenda. Of course, we also involved with the parliament and then also the line ministries. And all of those plan, which include, in my case, is include with the budgeting and the planning in accordance with the climate change issue. It is breakdown into the 5 years plan and also the annual plan. So this is how we design all of those intention of the climate change, and then the scope of the program into the activities that actually really closely related with the community. And then we also, and in accordance with the financial schemes, we also divided into the roles of the central government, local governments, and also the public-private partnership, and also the CSR, and as well as the international corporations, including the multilateral and bilateral agencies. So this is like the scope. And then in here we can see that when we talk about the community, which is like the important part, the key player of the actors, we call it the pentahelix. And pentahelix is not like it's not like a new term, but actually it brings the concept of collaborating every actors that related with the subject. So regarding with the issue of the climate change, we push and then we promote the pentahelix collaborative scheme, where all the actors, including the society, the academics, the private sector, including the department partners, media, and government, are working together. And then it's related with the multidisciplinary approach. And this is done in different platforms. So at the end, it will optimize the potential and then benefit all the collective outcomes that come from the collaborative works. So in the pentahelix, and if we see on the details, we see that the strength or the resources from the society is the human capital and social capital. And then from the academics, we acknowledge and identify that the knowledge, research, and innovation is sourced from the academics sector. And then we are working closely together with the private sector and government partners in terms of investment. And then they also role as the catalyst of the program. And in this context is for the climate change. And then also for the knowledge transfer, trainings, and banking. While in media, we regard them to help us in this initiative for the information dissemination, data publication, and also community control. And the government, and in this context, I'm part of the government, is in the part of the regulation, facilitation, coordination, and to create the standards and guidance. So this is on how we quote unquote like the role play, like the part where every component of the pentahelix is having an important role, and they make sure that this is work together. It's not in a contrary, but they complement each other to create the collaborative models. And then when we talk about the, I think the small scale in the national scope, which is the community community is the community is the one that doing the works at the local level. So if we link with the plan for the climate change, the program and activity that being designed together, it is being discussed with the community. We call it Musrenbang in Indonesia. It's like the public hearings, like public hearings. So community can give inputs during the creation of the program and activity, and also can implement, because in this climate change action or climate change program, it is like a broad term, but when we put it into the small scale of the community, we have to make sure that the community itself has to be part of the designing program and activity. I think that's my response. And to add more, to make it concrete, the program and activity in climate change should be made in a staging pace. So we should make a program activities that divided based on the timeline that are being designed. For example, the first phase is, or the first stage is the updating data and information on climate change, and then and other related topics. And then the second is on how we improving the management information system. For example, one map policy. And then the third stage is strengthening the capacity of the local government and strengthening the capacity of local communities. And then the other stage is strengthening the collaboration with the civil societies and university. And the government part has to be design a costing or making a costing the minimum standard services, and also calculating the investment plan on how we can achieve the goals for SDGs. And then there are also continuous efforts, including the building the knowledge management, because we should create a system. We are not should rely on person or individuals, but we should create a system that can sustain the climate change initiative at the national, regional, and local level. And then, of course, supporting with all those strategies, we should also conducting regular monitoring, evaluation, and also publishing regular reports. Yeah, maybe this is the stage and also the details on how we translate these big words of policy into the action that involve community as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mary, maybe very briefly in a follow-up question to that, you talked about how the process is. Can you give our participants an insight into what some of the challenges are working with policy at the community level? Being that communities are complex, they might want very different things depending on their economic sector or even where their residences are situated in a given city. So maybe just a 1-minute response to some challenges that policymakers face.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really on-point question, because for myself, even in this forum, I identify myself as the government official, but aside that, I'm also involved in some community, CSO that related with the environment. So there are really some mission or some of objective that every stakeholders have. So the challenges that the policy makers face in regard to the situations, first we have to go through the technocratic process. Technocratic process means that we should use all the related methods, all the relevant and valid methods to find the ideal answer regarding with the sustainable development goals programs or the climate change issue. And second, to make it work, it should have people's approval, and that's difficult things because we should build a consensus of the findings that we have we already got from the academics, from the university, from the local champions. We have to discuss and also collaborate all the inputs. So at the end, the middle ground, we have to put it into balance. Things that work according to the technocratic process, and then the things that can be accepted by people. So we should reach for that kind of balance. But at the end, we put of course the cost benefit ratio. We choose the ones that benefits people the most, but we have to communicate it continuously because one of the keywords is the consensus itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And consensus is always such a tricky thing at all levels of governance. So that's a really great insight. Maybe moving on to Mr. Shimizu. So we've asked you today to be kind of a youth voice, even though, as you said,
right at the edge. Yeah.
So keeping that in mind, but based on your experiences as well, I'm going to share my screen. And can you tell us, maybe in your own words, what one of the issues that we're quite interested in is youth have been a leading voice in climate action for many decades now. But realistically, we can't expect young people to do all of the work alone. So this is a bit of an inverse question of what youth usually get asked, but can you point out to what other generations can do to support youth, but as well as themselves for climate action? So much of today's talk about climate action talks about youth and how children will save us, but can other generations also contribute to saving themselves and leaving a legacy of trying to respond to climate change?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I'm going to keep my answers relatively brief because I think it's more exciting if we can kind of get a conversation going here. But the first thing that came to my mind when I heard about, when I read that question first, when it was sent to me, was the word intergenerational equity. And I think I like to take the naive view that when people understand a concept properly and they can see the value in that and the morality of that concept, they, to at least some extent, are able to align their actions around that. And I think, way back decades ago when that concept was first heralded by the United Nations, it really sent shockwaves when people started thinking about the environmental crisis and they realized that this was an issue that was going to leave a burden on the coming generations more so than the current generations. I think people kind of woke up to what this issue really meant and the severity of what's happening today. And of course, intergenerational equity is the concept that, our desires, our wants today should not be met at the cost of the future generations' ability to meet their needs and wants, which is unfortunately what's happening today with climate change. So, the generations that came before me, before Greta, are the ones that have pumped considerable amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And so they kind of were the ones that led this huge experiment, which we now call climate change. And we're the ones who are going to see the results of that experiment. Is that fair? Obviously not. Is it fair if I'm also a part of that experiment and leaving the results to be seen at an even less desirable or more detrimental extent by the generations that come after me? Of course, it's not fair. So from this perspective of fairness, you start to see kind of what we should and should not be doing today. And so for me, I really, really want to encourage all generations of everywhere to think from that perspective of intergenerational equity. And if it's hard to think from that perspective, then it's probably just, it's probably very easy for anybody to think about, holding your grandchildren in your arms and imagining what kind of world that they would have to live in. And for me, I like to believe that when people can really sit in those shoes and think about it and really ponder that perspective and, you know, feel all the feelings, the actions will kind of reveal themselves. I tend to believe that ascribing action, saying you have to do this, you have to do that, is less effective ultimately if you want to create fundamental change than it is for people to really step into that perspective. And so, you know, if I was sitting in front of a crowd of older generations, rather than say, you know, please do A, B, C, D, E, and F for the younger generation, I would probably say, think about it. Think about what legacy you're leaving. Think about the generations that are to come. Think about the fact that today, compared to 40 years ago, we see twice the amount of 50 degrees Celsius weather all over the planet. What's going to be the case 50 years from now when your child is your age, when your grandchild is maybe just about to turn 20? What kind of world are we leaving them? And that perspective hopefully inspires some sense of responsibility to do something, to take action. And I'll stop there for now.
Okay, that's a very good insight, Ian. Maybe just piggybacking on that a little, that idea of responsibility itself might be one of the things that is a challenge in this shifting of framework thinking, because from a very 1960s standpoint on, responsibility in a lot of countries was seen as, you know, you provide your child with a good education, that's the legacy you leave behind. And here we're passionate about education, but we've also taken a lot of things for granted, including the climate, and getting people to shift. Like, my legacy isn't just making sure my child does well and gets into a good school, but also they have resources behind, is something that a lot of people aren't used to thinking about. So in relation to my first question about what other generations can engage with or what they can do, what obstructs youth in engaging in working for action on climate change? And one of the things that I think has been really underappreciated in this debate is the average hours that young people are working around the world continues to increase. So where there's simply a lot of people who are spending much more time in their jobs. I'm not saying that your job can't also be climate action, but just that it's a very changing reality from activism, say, in the 1970s. So what are some of these obstacles that youth face, and is there any ways that we can help to overcome them?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That question immediately brings me back to when I was a university student, and when I first kind of had what has been called by the previous chief editor of Guardian, the newspaper, as Climageddon, which refers to that moment in your life when you kind of wake up to the extent and severity of the climate crisis, and you kind of stop and you know where you are, and you're just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? What can I do? And you know, you kind of sink, and you slowly kind of pick yourself up, and you start thinking about what you can do. And one of the things that I struggled most at that point in my life is that I looked around myself and I felt very, very lonely. I looked at my friends, I looked at my teachers, I looked at my family, and to my great pain, I found that most people didn't care as much as I did. Maybe it was just that they had not yet experienced Climageddon, or maybe they did know about it and didn't care. The thing is, it didn't really matter to me because it was evident in my eyes that the level of passion that I started feeling towards this issue was certainly not shared or apparent in those around me. And so I felt very lonely, and I was in a pretty famous Japanese private school known for being liberal and very open-minded, and yet, you know, the discourse around climate change was still very underdeveloped. Of course, it was very different at the time in 2013, 14, if you looked over to America or the UK. But certainly still, I think climate activism was very much a minority movement. And I think even today, you would find that in many environments, since I'm also involved in education and I find myself sitting in front of many students, in the normal school place or the normal, classroom, most people are not about to change their lives for the climate crisis, is what I've seen, is that while the media has made it seem as if students at the forefront are certainly the majority, I think the reality that it's still not the case. So I think there's still a lot of loneliness and anxiety and powerlessness that people feel when they kind of, realize that they have to do something. And I think that's a huge obstacle, feeling that you don't have the agency, that, people don't understand what you're going through, and you don't feel able to share the difficulty that you're having. And so, this becomes a very general answer. But I think positive encouragement for anybody who's going through that to take action, for anybody who's going through that to find a group and become a part of that group. Because for me, the biggest source of salvation in a way was being able to meet people who were as passionate as I was and have these conversations, share my feelings. And that calmed my anxiety and I was able to kind of funnel that energy that I was having towards action and activism. And I think that's probably the case with many people. Greta was silent for 2 years. She didn't even talk. And then somehow she got triggered to take action. And I suspect maybe somewhere along the line, she met other people who were, equally passionate as she was. And that's a kind of a common thread that I have seen in my activism, is that people really feel power when they get connected to others who are, as aware and as passionate as they are. And you create these tribes, you create these bonds, and, that gives you the fuel. So again, very general answer, but positive encouragement that, what you are feeling is not wrong. What you are feeling is right. You are justified to feel afraid. You are justified to feel anxious. It's okay. I feel the same way. And, welcome to this group, or here's a group that you might want to join. Here are friends that you can talk to. I think, open up about it and accept people, and encourage people to join communities that are taking action.
Thank you. I think that's a really insightful view, in that we often prescribe how young people should feel. Like, you should be worried about school, you should be worried about interpersonal relationships. I think both the media and adult culture in general really has a tendency to gaslight young people that are concerned about climate change, that they, their fear or their emotions, aren't relevant, but they're actually very relevant. So
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for that point. I think that's relevant for all generations, and we need to somehow remind ourselves that these are perfectly legitimate concerns, and that it's empowering to seek out other people that have those concerns. And to also, just even if we don't find those other people in our immediate surroundings, that those concerns are still legitimate. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think acceptance is one of the most important things that anybody can do for themselves. And if we can inspire people to simply accept them for who they are, that's great. And I agree with you that there's, even for myself as kind of a young entrepreneur, there's just so much media out there that, makes it seem as if I have to be working 18 hours a day because I'm involved in a startup. Whereas the reality is that it's more important for me to accept my own pace, accept, what I am willing to do and what I'm not willing to do. And when I operate from that space of acceptance, I see that I'm much more productive than I am when I'm operating from a place of, responding to external expectations. So I think, that's kind of a theme that has been common to me in my activism, whether it's been in, taking to the streets, fists in the air, calling on these banks to divest, or, currently involved in WeMori, creating different platforms and operating apps and so on to encourage people to protect and restore forests. It's really the power that drives me has come from acceptance and community. So yeah, I hope that's, I don't know if there's any youth here who are going through any of these processes, but yeah, this is kind of what I tell everybody, that it's okay. What you're feeling is real and true and justified, and, seek out community, because that's where you'll find your fuel.
Thank you very much. So next, perhaps, let's move on to Ms. Bridges. So the business sector, we're always talking, at least I shouldn't say we, but the media is always talking about, what challenges do business face under climate change? But on the flip side of this, maybe you can talk a little bit about what opportunities, in addition, that the business sector faces by taking action on climate change. And so
Sure.
any specific sectors are fine, but just to kind of flip the script a bit, because we have such a media discourse on all this onus being put on business, but what about the ones that are being iterative and are actually responding and thriving to the challenge?
Yeah, so I do want to talk a little bit about the challenges first, because I think oftentimes what we hear is a bit simplistic, and it doesn't really kind of properly touch upon what companies are actually doing when they try to take action on this. So I think the first thing, and this kind of piggybacks on on what Ian was saying, is that, we in business have a bit of a status quo situation. We have, organizations that are multi-generational, but are largely run by baby boomers, people who are their 60s, and also now Gen Xers, which is kind of my generation, the generation behind. My generation is kind of the straddling generation. So we're often trying to juggle these two pressures from a younger generation that wants organizations to take action, and an older organization who's a bit more reluctant. And so we're kind of in between managing this. So we're often in this status quo situation that's, really a problem with mindset, and also precedent what's come before, right? Business tends to act based on what's come before. So what's come before is not action on climate change, right? So people don't yet see fully the business case in it, which I think is unfortunate, because for me, it's clear the business case in not taking action, but that's one issue. We also, of course, have market pressures that are a real problem. We still have some investors who are very much old school in their approach and their thinking, and really pressure companies and penalize them when they do not take action. So for example, Danone is one great example. The CEO was really active in terms of different issues around climate change and social justice, and they didn't feel that the share price was performing as it should have been, and the activist investors really pushed him out of the company. So that's something that's happened. The same thing happened, for example, at Unilever. So that's a real challenge. We also have, which is the majority part of our market actually, which is SMEs. And SMEs and smaller businesses lack in resources. They lack in resources, they lack in knowledge. They're not really sure where to start. And this really touches upon your questions and points about local communities, because the local communities are largely people who work in small companies, in small organizations. So they're struggling to kind of take action because maybe they don't know where to start, or they don't have the resources to start. And then I think another thing, which is actually a problem, is probably all of us. So we tend to send very conflicting messages to companies about what we want. We say take action on climate, but yet we consume, ad nauseum, right? We want to, companies to invest, positive things and responsible things, but yet we don't invest our money in the same way. And we all struggle with that. So we send companies mixed messages, and that's not very helpful, actually. Because it always gives them an excuse not to do something. So those are the things that I think are challenges that are a little bit more complex than what we actually hear about in the media. In terms of opportunities, there are many. I mean, even from just a risk perspective, in certain industries, this has the potential to really destroy industries as we know it. So if we look at the insurance industry, which insures all of our homes and many things, what do we do if we're having, difficult weather events, problematic, destructive weather events constantly? How does the insurance company industry even manage in that? Or real estate or home building? It's an extremely risky proposition for business. Supply chain disruptions, for example, another huge issue in many sectors if we don't get this sorted out. But there is a lot of opportunity also in new products and services that are better products and services, ones that leave less of a footprint, that don't pollute as much, that really aren't necessarily as much of a drag on our climate, on our footprint. Certainly healthy organizations for the long term. We believe, as we said before, that managing these risks and such really gives us the opportunity to have better, longer organizations. We see a lot of organizations that have been around for a long time used to do social justice and these types of things very well because they were very involved with the community, especially in Japan. And we've lost some of that. So I think, there is a real argument to be made that our organizations will actually be more resilient if we take action on climate change. Employees, companies that are taking action on this are definitely seeing higher loyalty from employees. It helps with employee retention, for example. And then the last thing is really attracting capital. So we're starting to see more and more companies that are able to attract more capital because they're taking action on climate change. So there's recently been, for example, sustainability bonds or climate bonds that have been issued, and they've been oversubscribed, which means that investors are really quite interested, and those companies are getting more capital as a result of this. So those are just kind of some examples of some areas where there are some very interesting opportunities for business to take action.
Thank you very much. So maybe briefly in relation to that, talking about this idea of, so where companies can take action, what's an interface with like local stakeholders then? Because we tend to think of companies in boardrooms and doing PowerPoints at the top of office suites. But as you said, it's all these local consumers that send the signals to the companies. So what are some better ways that local communities can send signals that aren't so conflicting maybe?
Sure. I mean, absolutely. I think that, we're seeing a lot of really great community organizations that are coming about. And of course, climate change involves many things, right? It involves how we consume, it involves how we produce energy, it involves how we use energy and that type of thing. And there's some really interesting, private local partnerships, whether they be local communities or otherwise, to really take action. So for example, there's one example, an organization called Plastic Bank that basically works with local communities to collect plastic, builds facilities in those communities which give people work, collect the plastic, take it and reuse it, for that can be used into pellets and it's resold back to companies. And that's actually also funded by companies. So we need more models like that. We need more models of, clearer connections between local communities and large businesses and small alike, right? And working together in a collective way. And when there's large organizations, then really thinking about the impact and the people and the communities that they're impacting through their actions. So I think for those who are involved in local organizations and really want to get involved, there's all kinds of opportunities to partner and collaborate with companies to take action on this, local and small companies as well as large ones.
Great, thank you so much. So moving from the private sector into the NGO sector then. So Mr. Mappa, can you give us some insights into, we've talked about what the public and the private sector does in regards to climate action. Can you give us some insights into what the NGO sector does for facilitating action on climate change?
Oh, okay. As I mentioned earlier, climate change is a development issue. So it is both a problem faced by the current and future generations. So in many countries, like the Philippines, for example, the impacts are already being felt and experienced, and in extreme cases, especially by poor and vulnerable communities. And these communities, this sector is what NGOs are working with. So NGOs have a development-focused work that is directly engaged and rooted from the actual needs of the community people. NGOs have been implementing solutions to climate change that is, actually, if we look at it, it's very diverse, from raising awareness about climate change, supporting climate change adaptation activities, engaging the most vulnerable, helping communities improve local livelihoods that is climate smart, conducting research, influencing government policy and planning processes at different levels through advocacy activities. So NGOs play key roles in pushing for policies and programs on climate change and in holding governments to account in their communities and ensuring that whatever policies and programs that they do, they ensure that it does not forget the poor and the vulnerable. So in this context, actually, NGOs play a strategic role in developing and implementing solutions to climate change. Is that in ensuring social inclusion in implementing solutions to climate change. So actually, if we look at what the NGOs are doing, so there are two major areas of what NGOs are doing in creating solutions and actions regarding climate change. First is implementing and facilitating climate change adaptation and mitigation actions at the local level. And second is awareness raising and policy advocacy at different levels, local, national, up to at the international level. And if we look at what the NGOs have been doing, NGOs have been implementing development projects addressing poverty and other development issues. And by integrating the framework of climate change adaptation and mitigation in this project is already creating climate action and climate solution. And from directly working with vulnerable communities as they adapt to climate change, from renewable energy, climate sensitive agriculture, building sustainable communities, cities, developing resilient livelihoods, biodiversity conservation. And then by directly engaging, NGOs are actually facilitating an inclusive approach in developing and implementing solutions to climate change. And in the field of advocacy, over the past years, we have seen different NGOs together with other stakeholders coming together at the national and international level, forming networks to advocate for climate change, for action addressing the cost and impact of climate change. Okay. And as policy advocates, NGOs actually are building communities' capacities to ensure their government that their government are accountable and they are addressing that the government is addressing the people's needs and concerns from the impacts of climate change. Okay. And at the same time, NGOs are also they also play an important role in building and facilitating connections and bridges between vulnerable communities and those and the people and institutions in power to enact policies and develop programs that will protect people from the impacts of climate change and at the same time address the causes of climate change.
Thank you very much. You kind of already answered my next question. So maybe just in summation, you can talk very briefly about what are some of the opportunities that an NGO has for engagement with climate action that are unique to the NGO sector.
Okay. One of the challenges, okay, I'll go first for the challenges because NGOs are basically self-funded or are dependent from funding from donors. NGOs have a lot of good ideas, good and innovative ideas, but they have the limited resources and even technical expertise. So this is one. Although the donor funding for climate change activities has increased dramatically in recent years, however, accessing this has become complicated. Okay? So donors have become somewhat complicated in providing funding to NGOs. So this is where one of the many challenges in terms of continuity of NGO initiatives. Right? So that's why given this limitation, there's an opportunity for partnerships, engagement, partnerships with government and other with the government sector and also the private sector. Okay, in terms of as I have said, one of the challenges faced is that accessing donor funds, despite that there is this availability of funding from different donors, but it has become too complicated, and this somehow have marginalized many local NGOs, and that they had to compete with large international NGOs in accessing resources, okay, especially funding. Okay, another challenge faced by NGOs in implementing climate action is poor governance. I mean, good governance is very important in developing and implementing local climate change action. Okay. However, if a local government or a national government has a poor governance, very inefficient, whatever the expertise that NGOs have, and in engaging the government, the efforts are not that very fruitful. Okay, and then another challenge is the national and political situation is a critical factor as well in but it is a major factor for NGOs to be able to effectively implement climate action at the local community. So what we have here is, for example, antagonism towards NGOs by government and corporations, repression, harassment. A lot of NGOs are facing this. Okay, in some areas, harassment in countries and localities, NGOs are being labeled as troublemakers, stabilizers, and worse, as terrorists, and they are being tagged as enemies of the state. And this poses challenge to many NGOs, aside from their lives are put in danger, placed in danger. But then, despite of all these challenges, there's a lot of opportunities. NGOs have rich experience in working directly with local communities, especially the most vulnerable. And then there's also this opportunity of engagement and partnership with national, local, and global initiatives and opportunities to work with local government, especially in countries. For example, here in the Philippines, we have good laws. We have good laws related to climate change, and we even have bodies that is in charge of the issue, and we even have commissions for climate change. So in countries where policies and programs addressing climate change is present, the opportunity to engage with government and to be part of national and local initiatives, NGOs partnering with the government is a very good opportunity. Okay, those enabling policies provide those opportunities for NGOs to work with different stakeholders, and especially the government, because I mean, addressing this is primarily the government's responsibility. Okay, and of course, there's that opportunity to engage with the private sector. Okay, so because if we look at it, levels of climate change awareness within the private sector, it's not that very high. No, I mean, even the government, even working with the government, our experience is awareness about climate change. It's not that so high. We even have this. So I mean, engaging them, engaging the private sector to work hand in hand with the private sector is a good opportunity. So because looking at the private sector, it has much to contribute in addressing climate change. So it has the resources, it has the strength in terms of technological innovation. I mean, working with multi-stakeholders, NGOs working with different stakeholders, government, and the private sector is a good opportunity to really address the climate change, because climate change is it is a multi-level and it poses a lot of problems in different dimensions. Its cause is also multi-dimensional. So it requires a multi-stakeholder and a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approach in addressing this. And NGOs can work with government, the private sector, and other stakeholders in the community. And NGOs have the. Thank you.